Hi everyone, the purpose of this video is to share some memory tips and tricks to help you remember a specific set of neurotransmitters and their functions. I found that sometimes the names of these neurochemicals can be a bit tricky for students, and then matching them with their function can also be a little bit challenging. So here are my memory tips and tricks that will help you ace your test over neurotransmitters. So let's start with acetylcholine. Now, acetylcholine plays several different roles in the brain and body. It's involved with learning and memory, attention, and motivation. But since neurotransmitters often have overlapping functions, I usually encourage my students to focus on one key role. And for acetylcholine, I tell students to remember its role in muscle contraction. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter in the neuromuscular junction, which is where the nerve cells communicate with the muscle cells. When it's released, acetylcholine triggers muscle contraction, so it's essential for voluntary muscle movement. So, to remember this function, I focus on what the word sounds like acetylcholine. To me, it sounds like someone saying, take a seat. And if you take a seat, what you're doing is you're activating multiple muscles in your legs and in your back and in your abdomen. So, when you take a seat, your synapses are passing acetylcholine from one neuron to the next to communicate messages about muscle contraction. So, acetylcholine, take a seat. So, like acetylcholine, dopamine also has multiple functions in the nervous system. It helps send messages related to movement as well as learning and memory. And low levels of dopamine are linked to movement problems in Parkinson's disease, or high or imbalanced levels have also been associated with conditions like schizophrenia and addictions. But what makes dopamine especially notable is its central role in the brain's reward system. And this is usually where I tell my students to focus when memorizing functions. Dopamine is released as a response to pleasurable and rewarding experiences, things like eating or drinking or engaging in enjoyable activities. It motivates us to repeat those behaviors, and it leads to a sense of positive feelings, and it creates this sense of anticipation and satisfaction in that particular action. So, to remember this function, I focus on the first part of the word dopamine, dope, which, when you use it as an adjective, it means good or very good. So, if something is dope and you say that's dope, you're meaning that's good or that's very good. So, when you hear dopamine, think about that's dope, and it will remind you that dopamine communicates messages about pleasure and enjoyment. Next is serotonin. And like the others, it too has a variety of messages it can send in the nervous system, messages related to sleep and appetite. But I usually encourage students to remember its role in mood regulation. In fact, imbalances in serotonin can contribute to things like depression and anxiety. So, to remember its function, I focus on the phrase sad Sarah. Now, it's important to know that serotonin doesn't make you feel sad. In fact, serotonin is believed to balance your moods. But a lack of serotonin can be linked to depression. So, if you use the phrase sad Sarah, remember that serotonin's role is mood regulation, and that sad Sarah may need some serotonin support. So, as I mentioned with the other neurotransmitters, norepinephrine also has a variety of responsibilities in the nervous system, but I would say one of its key roles is its responsibility in communicating messages about speeding up the body's functions, especially as it relates to preparing for a fight or flight situation. And it releases this response to stress. So, to remember that, I think of next level Nora, and I imagine an adrenaline junkie who likes the rush of that fight or flight stress response, that on the edge experience that you feel when your heart rate increases and your breathing gets faster and you have heightened attention. So, if you remember next level Nora, then hopefully you will be reminded that norepinephrine communicates messages in the body to speed up its functions in response to stress. The next neurotransmitter is glutamate. Now, glutamate plays a key role in communicating messages about learning and memory. Now, to remember this, I focus on the last part of the word, mate, which means friend or buddy. And this helps me remember the role of glutamate in learning and memory because I'm reminded that glutamate is your all time study buddy. Glutamate is your buddy, your study buddy. Now, GABA is one of the main inhibitory neurotransmitters, which means it reduces neural activity. And this can affect your mood and your sleep and your overall well being because overexcited synapses can lead to anxiety and agitation and stress. So, I usually tell students to remember that GABA is responsible for its calming effects on the body. GABA naturally slows and calms and relaxes the nervous system. So, to remember its calming effect, I focus on the sound of the word GABA. If you drag out that last A, GABA, it might sound like a peaceful and calming noise, and it reminds me of a meditative state. So, GABA can remind you about calming the body. Substance P is the message that's sent when the body experiences pain and inflammation. Now, personally, I think this is one of the easiest to remember because it's titled with a P, which is the same first letter in the word pain. So I tell myself substance P, substance pain. Endorphins are chemicals that are released in response to pain or intense physical stress. They help reduce the perception of pain by blocking pain signals from reaching the brain. Some people call endorphins the body's natural painkillers because they temporarily mask the pain and sometimes allow that person to continue functioning despite an injury. For example, someone in a serious accident might not immediately feel the pain of their injury because the endorphins are released and block the pain signals for a short time. Endorphins can also be released during intense physical activity like running. This release can lead to a feeling of euphoria and reduced pain. Sometimes people call this a runner's high. So, that good feeling and pain relief during or after tough exercise can be credited to the release of endorphins. So, to remember its function, I see the word endorphin and I focus on the first three letters, end. And then notice there's a P in the last part of the word. So, this reminds me that endorphins end pain. All right, so those are my tips and tricks that help me remember the functions of neurotransmitters. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching.